Picture this: rolling hills, vivid green landscapes, and the warm Indian Ocean breeze. This is KwaZulu-Natal, a province on the east coast of South Africa, a place steeped in rich history and vibrant culture. But beneath this picturesque facade, KwaZulu-Natal in the early 20th century grappled with the harsh realities of apartheid. This system of racial segregation, brutally enforced by the white minority government, cast a dark shadow over the lives of millions of Black South Africans. Imagine living under a system that dictated where you could live, work, and even love, based solely on the color of your skin. In this deeply divided society, opportunities for Black South Africans were limited, and poverty was a stark reality for many. Education was a privilege often denied, and access to basic necessities like healthcare and housing was a constant struggle. Yet, amidst these hardships, the spirit of resistance burned bright. The people of KwaZulu-Natal, known for their resilience and unwavering spirit, refused to be defined by the oppressive system imposed upon them. The African National Congress, ANC, a political organization at the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement, found fertile ground in KwaZulu-Natal. The ANC's message of equality, freedom, and self-determination resonated deeply with the people, igniting a spark of hope for a better future. It was against this backdrop of struggle and hope that Jacob Zuma was born on April 12, 1942, in the small rural village of Nkandla, KwaZulu-Natal. Nkandla, nestled in the heart of KwaZulu-Natal, was a world away from the corridors of power in Pretoria and Cape Town. Life in this rural village was tough, characterized by poverty, limited opportunities, and the ever-present weight of apartheid. Zuma's family, like many others in Nkandla, faced a daily struggle for survival. His father, a policeman, tragically passed away when Zuma was just a young boy, leaving his mother, a domestic worker, to raise him and his siblings alone. Zuma's childhood was marked by hardship, but it was also a time when the seeds of his political consciousness were sown. Growing up in KwaZulu-Natal, he witnessed firsthand the injustices of apartheid and the impact it had on his community. The sight of his own people treated as second-class citizens, denied basic rights and dignity, fueled a fire in his belly. Despite the lack of formal education, Zuma possessed a sharp mind and an innate charisma that drew people to him. He listened to the stories of elders, absorbing the history and traditions of his people, and he observed the political landscape with a keen eye. The ANC, with its message of liberation and equality, resonated deeply with the young Zuma. At the tender age of 17, while many of his peers were preoccupied with youthful pursuits, Zuma made a life-altering decision. He joined the African National Congress, fully aware of the risks involved, but undeterred in his commitment to fighting for a just and equitable South Africa. This decision would shape the course of his life, leading him down a path filled with both triumphs and tribulations. From the rural backwater of Nkandla to the national stage, Zuma's journey is a testament to the complexities of a man shaped by his environment and driven by a potent mix of ambition, ideology, and a quest for power. Joining the ANC in 1959 was a baptism by fire for the young Zuma. The organization, banned by the apartheid government and operating underground, demanded courage and commitment from its members. Imagine the clandestine meetings, the constant fear of arrest, and the unwavering belief in a cause bigger than oneself. Zuma, full of youthful idealism and driven by a deep sense of injustice, threw himself into the struggle. He started with small tasks, distributing pamphlets, attending secret gatherings, and spreading the ANC's message in his community. These seemingly insignificant acts were acts of defiance against a brutal regime, small ripples of resistance that would eventually contribute to a tidal wave of change. Zuma's charisma and natural leadership qualities, honed in the rural villages of KwaZulu-Natal, came to the fore. He had a way of connecting with people, of inspiring them with his words and actions, and he quickly rose through the ranks of the ANC. His ability to mobilize people, to rally them around the cause, did not go unnoticed by the senior leadership of the ANC. They saw in him a young man of great potential, a future leader who could inspire others to fight for freedom. But the path to freedom was fraught with danger, and the apartheid regime, determined to crush any form of dissent, was relentless in its pursuit of ANC activists. Zuma, like many of his comrades, would soon face the full wrath of the state. As the apartheid government tightened its grip on power, the ANC realized that peaceful resistance alone would not be enough to dismantle the system of oppression. In 1961, the ANC formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, its armed wing, to wage a campaign of sabotage against government installations. The decision to take up arms was not taken lightly. It was a strategic move, born out of necessity, to challenge the very foundations of the apartheid state. Zuma, now a seasoned activist, felt a sense of duty to join the armed struggle. He underwent military training, learning how to handle explosives and weapons, skills he hoped he would never have to use, but were necessary in the fight for freedom. The MK's operations were carefully planned to minimize civilian casualties, targeting symbols of apartheid infrastructure, such as power plants, railway lines, and government buildings. These acts of sabotage, while not intended to cause loss of life, were a way of showing the government that the ANC was a force to be reckoned with. Zuma's role in MK was primarily that of a recruiter and organizer. He traveled throughout South Africa, often under assumed identities, establishing underground cells and mobilizing support for the armed struggle. These were dangerous times, with the constant threat of arrest looming over him. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face in the crowd could be the enemy closing in. But Zuma pressed on, driven by his unwavering belief in the righteousness of the cause. Section 3. Robben Island, a crucible of resistance. In 1963, Zuma's luck ran out. He was arrested along with 45 other ANC operatives in a police raid on a farm in Rivonia, near Johannesburg. This raid would have significant implications for the anti-apartheid movement, as it led to the arrest of key ANC leaders, including Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Govan Mbeki. The Rivonia trial, as it came to be known, was a pivotal moment in South Africa's history. The world watched as Zuma and his comrades were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but the judge, in a landmark decision, sentenced them to life imprisonment instead. Zuma, just 21 years old, was sent to the infamous Robben Island, a maximum security prison located off the coast of Cape Town. Robben Island was more than just a prison. It was a place where the apartheid government sought to break the spirit of its opponents. The conditions were harsh, the work grueling, and the treatment by warders often brutal. But Robben Island would also become an unlikely crucible of resistance, a place where the bonds of comradeship were forged in the face of adversity. It was on Robben Island that Zuma would spend the next 10 years of his life, alongside some of the most prominent figures in the anti-apartheid movement. He shared a cell with Walter Sisulu, a man he had admired since his youth, and he had the opportunity to interact with Nelson Mandela, who, despite being imprisoned for over 2 decades, remained a beacon of hope for millions of South Africans. Section 1. A New Dawn, Release and the Transition to Democracy. Picture this. The year is 1973. After a decade of confinement on Robben Island, the prison gates finally swung open for Jacob Zuma. He walked free, greeted by the cheers of family and comrades who had never given up hope. Imagine the mix of emotions, the joy of reunion, the relief of freedom, and the lingering scars of imprisonment. Zuma's release, along with that of many other political prisoners, signaled a shift in the political landscape of South Africa. The apartheid regime, facing mounting internal and international pressure, was beginning to show cracks in its facade. The struggle for liberation, once confined to clandestine meetings and acts of sabotage, was now being fought on multiple fronts, in the streets, in the courts, and at the negotiating table. Zuma, hardened by his years in prison, but his spirit unbroken, was eager to rejoin the fight. He quickly immersed himself in the activities of the ANC, which, though still banned, operated with increasing boldness within South Africa. However, the transition from prisoner to politician was not without its challenges. Zuma had been cut off from the outside world for 10 years, a decade in which South Africa had undergone significant changes. The Soweto Uprising of 1976, a watershed moment in the struggle against apartheid, had ignited a new generation of activists, many of whom had never known a South Africa without the ANC operating underground. Zuma had to adapt to this new political reality, to bridge the gap between the older generation of leaders who had endured the hardships of imprisonment and the younger generation who were eager for change. His experience on Robben Island, far from being a hindrance, had honed his political skills and deepened his commitment to the cause. He was ready to play his part in the long and arduous journey towards a democratic South Africa. Section 2. Climbing the ranks, from exile to provincial leadership. The mid-70s saw Zuma taking on increasingly prominent roles within the ANC. He was tasked with rebuilding the organization's structures in KwaZulu-Natal, his home province, which had become a hotbed of resistance against apartheid. Imagine the challenge: operating under the watchful eye of the security police, constantly on the move, yet determined to breathe life back into the ANC's network of underground cells. Zuma's charisma, his ability to connect with people from all walks of life, proved invaluable in this task. He crisscrossed the province, meeting with student leaders, trade unionists, and community activists, reigniting the spirit of defiance and mobilizing support for the ANC. His efforts did not go unnoticed by the apartheid regime, and in 1975, facing imminent arrest, Zuma was forced to flee South Africa. He joined the ranks of ANC exiles in Mozambique, which had gained independence from Portugal in 1975 and become a haven for liberation movements from across southern Africa. Exile was a time of both hardship and opportunity for Zuma. Separated from his family and homeland, he lived a life of uncertainty, constantly aware of the threat posed by the apartheid regime's cross-border raids on ANC safe houses. Yet, exile also provided Zuma with the space to further develop his political skills. He underwent further training in politics, diplomacy, and intelligence gathering, skills that would serve him well in the years to come. He played a key role in setting up and running ANC structures in Mozambique, Swaziland, and other neighboring countries, ensuring that the organization remained a potent force in the fight against apartheid. Zuma's time in exile was a testament to his unwavering commitment to the struggle for liberation, a period of personal sacrifice and political growth that would shape his destiny. Section 3. Stepping onto the national stage. Deputy President Zuma. The winds of change were sweeping across South Africa in the late 1980s. The release of Nelson Mandela in 1990 and the unbanning of the ANC marked the beginning of a new era. The long and arduous negotiations to dismantle apartheid and establish a democratic South Africa were underway. Zuma, having returned from exile, found himself at the center of these historic events. He was appointed head of the ANC's intelligence department, a crucial role in the delicate and often dangerous task of ensuring a peaceful transition to democracy. Imagine the tension, the high stakes, and the need for cool heads as former enemies sat across the negotiating table, trying to chart a new course for South Africa. Zuma's intelligence background, honed during his years in exile, proved invaluable in this process. He played a key role in mediating between the ANC and the apartheid government, building trust and finding common ground where it seemed impossible. His efforts helped to create the conditions for the historic 1994 elections, which saw the ANC win a landslide victory and Nelson Mandela become South Africa's first black president. Zuma's contribution to this historic achievement did not go unnoticed. He was appointed Minister of Economic Affairs and Tourism in Mandela's government, a position that allowed him to apply his political skills to the challenges of rebuilding a nation ravaged by decades of apartheid. Zuma's ability to connect with ordinary South Africans, to understand their hopes and aspirations, made him a popular figure. He traveled extensively throughout the country, listening to people's concerns and promoting reconciliation and nation building. His star was rising, and in 1999, when Thabo Mbeki succeeded Mandela as president, Zuma was appointed Deputy President of South Africa, a testament to his remarkable journey from Robben Island prisoner to one of the most powerful men in the country. Section 1. At the helm, the Zuma presidency, 2009 to 2018. The year is 2009. South Africa, a young democracy still finding its feet, is buzzing with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Jacob Zuma, the man who had risen from the rural heartland to the upper echelons of power, is sworn in as the country's fourth president. After years of serving as Thabo Mbeki's deputy, Zuma is finally at the helm, ready to steer the nation towards his vision of a more equitable and prosperous future. Zuma, a master strategist known for his charm and ability to connect with the masses, takes office with a wave of popular support. He promises to address the persistent issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment that continue to plague South Africa, particularly within the Black community. His supporters, many of whom see him as a champion of the poor and marginalized, place their hopes and dreams on his shoulders. The early years of Zuma's presidency are marked by a focus on social welfare programs, infrastructure development, and strengthening South Africa's role on the African continent. He expands social grants, providing a much-needed safety net for millions living in poverty. Under his leadership, South Africa joins the BRICS group of emerging economies, signaling its growing influence on the global stage. Yet, even as Zuma enjoys the trappings of power and the adulation of his supporters, a storm is brewing. Whispers of corruption, cronyism, and a growing abuse of power begin to surface, casting a long shadow over his presidency. The very qualities that endeared him to the masses, his charisma, his loyalty to his allies, his tendency to prioritize personal relationships over institutional integrity, become his Achilles heel. Section 2. Scandals and controversies, a cloud of suspicion. As Zuma settles into his presidency, the scandals that had dogged his earlier political career refuse to be silenced. The arms deal corruption charges, though initially dismissed, resurface with renewed vigor. Opposition parties, sensing blood in the water, seize on every opportunity to highlight Zuma's alleged involvement in shady dealings. The media, once largely sympathetic to Zuma and his narrative of overcoming adversity, begins to scrutinize his every move. Headlines scream of financial impropriety, questionable appointments to key government positions, and a growing culture of impunity within the ruling ANC. One scandal, in particular, captures the nation's attention and becomes synonymous with the Zuma presidency: Nkandla. What begins as a seemingly routine security upgrade to the president's private residence in rural KwaZulu-Natal spirals into a symbol of excess, corruption, and a blatant disregard for public funds. The public is outraged as details emerge of the exorbitant costs involved in upgrading Nkandla. A swimming pool, initially justified as a fire pool, becomes a source of public ridicule. The construction of an amphitheater, cattle kraals, and other non-security-related upgrades fuels accusations that Zuma is using his position for personal enrichment. The Nkandla scandal, more than any other, chips away at Zuma's carefully constructed image as a man of the people. As the Nkandla scandal unfolds, a far more insidious and damaging web of corruption begins to unravel. The Gupta family, wealthy Indian South African business tycoons with close ties to Zuma, emerges as central figures in what will come to be known as state capture. The Guptas, through a combination of political connections, backroom deals, and outright bribery, gain undue influence within key state institutions. They are accused of swaying ministerial appointments, influencing government contracts, and even having a say in the appointment of the country's finance minister. The term state capture becomes synonymous with the Zuma administration, sending shockwaves through South Africa and beyond. The public protector, Thuli Madonsela, a fierce advocate for accountability and good governance, launches an investigation into the Gupta's dealings. Her report, titled State of Capture, sends shockwaves through the country, detailing a web of corruption that reaches the highest levels of government. The report's findings are explosive, alleging that Zuma and those close to him have allowed the Guptas to wield undue influence over state affairs for personal gain. The scandal deepens public distrust in the government and the ANC, once revered for its role in the fight against apartheid. South Africa, once hailed as a beacon of hope for democracy, finds itself grappling with a crisis of leadership and a deeply compromised state. By 2018, the pressure on Jacob Zuma had reached a boiling point. The relentless scandals, the mounting evidence of corruption, and the growing public outcry could no longer be ignored. The ANC, once solidly behind its leader, began to fracture. Senior party members, fearing the long-term damage to the ANC's reputation, called for Zuma's resignation. Imagine the internal power struggles, the closed-door meetings, and the tense negotiations as the party grappled with the consequences of its leader's actions. Zuma, never one to relinquish power easily, initially resisted the calls to step down. He maintained his innocence, claiming to be the victim of a political witch hunt orchestrated by his enemies within and outside the ANC. However, the writing was on the wall. Facing the very real possibility of impeachment by the South African parliament and growing dissent within his own party, Zuma finally yielded to pressure. On February 14, 2018, in a televised address to the nation, Jacob Zuma announced his resignation as president of South Africa. His departure, while met with relief by many, did little to quell the storm he had unleashed. South Africa was left to grapple with the debris of his scandal-ridden presidency. The institutions of democracy weakened, and public trust in government severely eroded. The question on everyone's mind was whether Zuma would finally face accountability for his alleged crimes, or whether he would manage to slip away from the clutches of justice once more. Zuma's resignation did not signal an end to his legal woes. In fact, it was just the beginning of a new chapter in his long and tumultuous relationship with the South African justice system. Freed from the protections afforded to a sitting president, Zuma found himself facing a barrage of legal challenges, each one a reminder of the shadows that had darkened his time in office. The National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, which had previously dropped corruption charges against Zuma in a controversial decision widely seen as politically motivated, came under new leadership. Emboldened by Zuma's removal from office and armed with a trove of evidence gathered during the state capture inquiry, the NPA revived the charges relating to the arms deal scandal. Zuma, true to form, denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the charges were politically motivated and part of a conspiracy to discredit him. He employed a range of legal tactics to delay and obstruct the prosecution's efforts, putting on a masterclass in legal maneuvering that frustrated his critics and tested the patience of the South African public. However, Zuma's luck, which had seemed to hold for so long, was finally running out. The South African courts, once seen as susceptible to political influence, had undergone a period of reform and were determined to assert their independence. Zuma's delaying tactics, while successful in the short term, only served to strengthen the resolve of the judiciary to hold him accountable. The stage was set for a legal showdown that would captivate the nation and determine whether South Africa's democracy was strong enough to hold even its most powerful figures accountable for their crimes. Section 3. A Tarnished Legacy. South Africa in the shadow of Zuma. As Jacob Zuma's legal battles played out in the courts, South Africa found itself grappling with the long shadow cast by his presidency. The euphoria that had accompanied the end of apartheid and the birth of a new democracy had long faded, replaced by a sense of disillusionment and a deep yearning for ethical leadership. The state capture inquiry, headed by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, had laid bare the extent of the rot that had set in during Zuma's time in office. The inquiry's report, a damning indictment of corruption and abuse of power, sent shockwaves through the country. It revealed a systematic effort to hollow out state institutions, to enrich a select few at the expense of the many, and to undermine the very foundations of South Africa's hard-won democracy. The economic consequences of Zuma's reign were equally stark. Corruption and mismanagement had crippled state-owned enterprises, discouraged foreign investment, and led to a decline in living standards for millions of South Africans. The gap between rich and poor, a legacy of apartheid that the ANC had pledged to address, had widened under Zuma's watch. Yet, amidst the despair and the anger, there were also glimmers of hope. The fact that the state capture inquiry had been allowed to proceed, that its findings were made public, and that Zuma himself was facing the full force of the law were all testaments to the resilience of South Africa's democratic institutions. The election of Cyril Ramaphosa as Zuma's successor brought with it a renewed sense of optimism, a belief that South Africa could still overcome the legacy of corruption and division. However, the road to recovery promised to be long and arduous. The task ahead was not just to bring the perpetrators of state capture to justice, but to rebuild trust in government, to heal the divisions within society, and to restore South Africa's standing as a beacon of hope in a troubled world. Section 1. A Nation Divided, Zuma's Polarizing Legacy. Jacob Zuma's story is a tangled web of triumph and tragedy. He rose from humble beginnings, a freedom fighter who endured the brutality of Robben Island, to become the president of a nation reborn. He embodied the hopes and dreams of millions who had yearned for a South Africa free from the shackles of apartheid. Yet power, like a double-edged sword, can uplift and destroy. Zuma's presidency, once brimming with promise, became mired in scandal and corruption. The man who had fought for equality and justice stood accused of betraying those very ideals, of prioritizing personal gain over the needs of his people. Today, South Africa remains deeply divided over Zuma's legacy. For some, he remains a hero, a symbol of the struggle against oppression. They point to his charisma, his ability to connect with ordinary South Africans, and his efforts to address poverty and inequality. They argue that his flaws should not overshadow his contributions to the fight for freedom. Section 2. The Price of Freedom, the Fragility of Democracy. Zuma's rise and fall offer a sobering lesson in the fragility of democracy, particularly in nations grappling with the legacy of colonialism and systemic inequality. South Africa's story, once a beacon of hope for a world yearning for justice, serves as a stark reminder that freedom, once won, must be constantly defended. The state capture inquiry exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most well-intentioned democracies. It showed how easily power can be abused, how greed can corrupt even those who have fought for noble causes, and how quickly the institutions designed to safeguard freedom can be eroded from within. Zuma's presidency, for all its flaws, also highlighted the resilience of South Africa's democratic spirit. The fact that he was held accountable, that he was forced to resign, and that he faced the full force of the law speaks volumes about the strength of South Africa's institutions and the unwavering commitment of its people to the rule of law. Section 3. Looking ahead. South Africa at a crossroads. As South Africa moves forward, it does so with the weight of history on its shoulders. The wounds of apartheid run deep. Zuma's legacy of corruption and state capture has left its mark. The challenges facing the nation remain immense: poverty, inequality, unemployment, crime, and a healthcare system struggling to cope. Yet, amidst these challenges, there is also a sense of hope, a belief that South Africa can still fulfill its promise as a nation where all its citizens have an equal opportunity to thrive. The spirit of Ubuntu, of shared humanity and interconnectedness that sustained the anti-apartheid struggle remains strong. The task ahead is not just to repair the damage of the past, but to build a future where corruption is not tolerated, where the rule of law is paramount, and where the voices of all South Africans are heard and respected. It is a future that will require strong and ethical leadership, a commitment to good governance, and the active participation of all South Africans. It is a future worth fighting for, a future that honors the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom and offers hope to generations to come.